Anna and Richard had always wanted a child. Their journey to parenthood wasn't an easy one, but after years of medical interventions, they were finally blessed with a son. John, their long-awaited miracle, was born, and from that moment, everything in their lives revolved around him. They doted on him, giving him everything he could ever want and more. John was Anna's world, and though Richard loved him dearly, it was clear that Anna had an almost unhealthy obsession with her son. They lived in a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, one where the sun always seemed to shine and the grass was perfectly manicured. On the outside, their family appeared perfect. But behind closed doors, Anna's intense love for John was slowly beginning to suffocate him. As John grew, so did Anna's protective nature. She couldn't bear the thought of him ever being hurt or unhappy. When he took his first steps, Anna hovered over him, ensuring that he wouldn't stumble and fall. When he started school, she was always there to make sure he had everything he needed, and sometimes even more. She was the type of mother who volunteered for everything, always present, always watching. Richard noticed the odd dynamic between his wife and son, but he didn't speak up. He assumed it was just a phase, that it was natural for a mother to be so involved in her child's life. But as John grew older, Richard began to see something darker at play. John had never learned the concept of boundaries, not from his mother, and without boundaries, there was no growth, no sense of independence. By the time John turned 12, Anna was still insisting that he sleep in her bed. It wasn't a secret. It was just how things were in their house. John would curl up next to her, resting his head on her chest, and fall asleep to the sound of her heartbeat. Some might say it was comforting. Others might have found it strange. But Anna was unbothered by what others thought. It was their bond, and nothing could break it. Richard, though uncomfortable with the situation, never voiced his concerns. He didn't want to rock the boat, but when he did mention it to Anna once, suggesting that John might benefit from having his own space, she simply dismissed it. "He's not ready yet," she'd say, her voice soft but resolute. "He needs me." And John did need her. He relied on her for everything, school assignments, meals, even his social life. Anna made sure he had the best of everything. He was enrolled in private schools, given the most expensive clothes, and never had to lift a finger. He had a circle of friends, but they didn't come over often. John preferred staying home, where everything was under his mother's watchful eye. But as John entered his teenage years, there was something else that began to creep into his behavior. He started to show signs of rebellion. Not in the usual way, where a teen might act out with defiance. No. John's rebellion was quieter, more insidious. He began to resent the constant attention and the lack of freedom. But he didn't know how to escape it. His whole life had been shaped by his mother's love, which had gradually turned into something smothering. John's frustration didn't stay hidden for long. One evening, when he was 16, he came home late from a school event. Anna was waiting for him, as usual, her arms folded across her chest, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Where have you been?" she demanded, the familiar tone of control lacing her voice. John, irritated by her constant surveillance, snapped back. "I don't need you to monitor me, Mom. I'm not a kid anymore." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Richard, who had been sitting in the living room, looked up from his newspaper. Anna froze, her eyes filling with hurt and confusion. She had never once thought that her actions might be overbearing. She couldn't understand why John was pushing back. After all, everything she had done was for him, wasn't it? For a moment, there was silence in the house. John stormed up to his room, and Anna stood in place, staring at the spot where her son had been moments before. Richard sighed deeply, his own frustration rising. He had been silently watching this dynamic for years, and now it was unraveling before his eyes. He knew something had to change, but what? A year later, John was accepted into a prestigious school in England, an opportunity that should have filled him with excitement. But instead, it felt like another suffocating step into Anna's ever-present grip. John was about to leave for a new chapter of his life, but Anna had already started making plans for how she would stay involved. She insisted on calling him every day, checking in, making sure he was eating well, and telling him how much she missed him. John's resentment grew with each passing day. When he first arrived at the school, he felt an odd mix of relief and fear. For the first time in his life, he was alone, but he didn't know what to do with his newfound freedom. The change wasn't immediate. At first, John tried to comply with his mother's constant demands. He would send her photos, update her on his classes, and answer her phone calls. But as the weeks passed, he started slipping. He missed classes, drank alcohol in secret, and began making friends who encouraged his reckless behavior. When Anna called, John would lie. "Yes, I'm doing great, Mom. Everything is fine." But inside, John was spiraling. The boy, who had once been overly dependent on his mother, now found himself lost in a sea of confusion and self-destructive choices. John's descent into darkness continued when, one fateful weekend, he returned to his dorm with a large black bag slung over his shoulder. His roommate, curious, asked what was inside. "Just some stuff for my project," John replied quickly, brushing past him. But when John closed the door to his room, a sense of unease filled the space. Inside the bag were weapons, guns, knives, and ammunition, all neatly packed and ready for something, though no one knew exactly what. John had been planning for weeks, even months, preparing for something that would change everything. He didn't care about the school or his mother or the people around him. His mind was clouded with anger, frustration, and an overwhelming desire to prove that he could control something in his life. Anything. John had been pushed to the edge, and the weaponry in that bag wasn't just for self-defense. It was for revenge. It was for control. It was for power, and now he was ready. The day of the charity event arrived. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and faculty. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing as they mingled before the festivities began. John walked in, blending in with the crowd. But there was an intensity in his eyes, something no one could see, something only Anna, if she had been paying attention, might have noticed. John made his way to the back of the room, where he found a secluded spot. He sat in the shadows, waiting. No one suspected anything. The event went on like any other, until it didn't. Without warning, John stood up, pulling the gun from beneath his jacket. He fired it into the air, sending the crowd into a panic. Screams echoed through the auditorium as people scrambled for the exits, but John had already locked the doors. He was in control now. John's face was cold, emotionless, as he took aim at those who had once been his peers. He had nothing to lose. The person who had once been so dependent on his mother's love was now a twisted reflection of that love, a force of destruction that no one could have predicted. By the time the police arrived, the damage was done. Several people were injured, and John was arrested. His mother's calls were ignored as Anna rushed to the scene, her world collapsing around her. She couldn't understand what had happened, how the son she had loved so fiercely had turned into something unrecognizable. The investigation revealed John's plans, his obsession with control, and his deep resentment of his mother's overbearing love. He had become a product of that love, stifled, suffocated, and twisted. The public was shocked, but no one was more affected than Anna. Her refusal to see John for who he truly was had led to this moment, a tragedy that could have been prevented. Anna's life after the tragedy was nothing like what she had envisioned. She had never imagined that the love she poured into her son could ever have led to something like this. For weeks after the event, she was lost in a haze of guilt and disbelief. The world had turned upside down, and she couldn't see the way forward. She tried to reach John, but the letters she sent to his prison cell were returned unopened. His silence was more deafening than any words could have been. The image of her son, once innocent and full of potential, had morphed into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. And in her heart, she knew the truth. She had been the one to create this version of John. Richard, too, was grappling with his own feelings. Though he had always been more distanced from John's upbringing, he had witnessed the gradual tightening of Anna's control over their son. He hadn't been able to intervene, to say anything that would have broken the cycle. Now, it was too late. He had tried to console Anna, but her grief consumed her, leaving no room for anyone else. They lived in the same house, but it was as though they were strangers, each locked in their own private pain. Anna couldn't bear to be in their home anymore. Every corner of it reminded her of the way John had once been, the way he had trusted her, needed her. Now, those memories felt like a cruel joke. Anna sought answers in therapy, but nothing seemed to bring her relief. She would sit in the sterile chair, her hands trembling, as she told her therapist about John, about her overbearing love, about how she had never seen the signs that he was suffocating under the weight of her expectations. Every session left her with more questions than answers, but she couldn't stop. She needed to understand what went wrong, why she hadn't seen it coming. One evening, during a particularly intense therapy session, Anna broke down completely. The dam that had been holding her grief together cracked wide open. She cried for John, for the life that could have been, for the boy she had failed. And for the first time in a long time, she realized that she might never get forgiveness, from John, from herself, or from anyone else. But she couldn't stop trying. She couldn't let go of the idea that there might still be a way to make things right. Every day, she scoured news reports, hoping for some glimmer of hope, some sign that John was still in there, still the son she once knew. But as the months passed, it became harder to hold on to that hope. The boy, who had once been so full of life and promise, seemed to be slipping further and further away from her grasp. The months in prison felt like years to John. In the stark, lonely confines of his cell, he had plenty of time to reflect on everything: his childhood, his mother's overbearing love, the tragedy he had caused. The pain of the moment he'd lost control haunted him, but it also made him realize something deeper. He had always been running from her. Even when he thought he wanted her love, he had been desperate to escape it. The more she tried to control him, the more he rebelled against the very thing that was supposed to nurture him. His mind twisted in on itself as he thought about his future. Would he ever get out of prison? If he did, what would he be? A broken shell of a person? Someone who could never outrun the darkness inside of him? His mother's love had been his prison, and now, in a very real sense, he was trapped in another one. But in the solitude of his prison cell, John began to change. It wasn't immediate, but slowly, he started to understand what had happened to him. It wasn't just his mother's fault. He had played a part in this too. He had let his anger and resentment fester until they consumed him. He had allowed himself to be molded by the suffocating love that had come from Anna. But he had also let his own twisted desires take hold. There was no easy path to redemption, but John realized that if he was going to change, he would need to do it for himself. He had to let go of the past, of the anger, and of the need to prove something. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way he could see to break the cycle of pain that had defined his life. Back at home, Anna's journey had reached a crossroads. She had spent months trying to fix herself, but something inside her was still broken. She couldn't bring herself to leave the house they had once shared, the house filled with memories of a time when John had been her whole world. But those memories now felt like a weight she couldn't carry any longer. One evening, Anna stood in John's old room, staring at the empty bed where he used to sleep. She ran her fingers across the desk where his school books once lay, and her eyes drifted to the picture frame on the wall, one of their family photos taken years ago. The smile on John's face in that picture seemed so far away, a memory from a life that no longer existed. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to see the truth. John wasn't just a victim of her love. He had been a victim of her refusal to see him for who he truly was. She had created an idealized version of him in her mind, one that she had desperately clung to. But in doing so, she had ignored the boy who was struggling under her control. And now, he was paying the price for it. The pain was unbearable, but it was also a moment of clarity. She couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, she could try to make amends. Even if it was too late to fix her relationship with John, she could begin to understand herself. She could start with forgiveness. John's life in prison was hard, but he began to find peace in unexpected places. He took part in therapy, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to understand himself better. He began writing letters to his mother, not asking for forgiveness, but simply telling her what he had been feeling all these years. The letters were full of raw emotion, of pain, of self-loathing, but also of a strange kind of acceptance. He knew he had hurt people, and he had no idea if anyone would ever forgive him. But as he wrote to Anna, he realized that forgiveness didn't come from the outside, it had to come from within. He wasn't sure if he could forgive himself, but he was willing to try. Anna received John's first letter months after he sent it. She read it over and over, each word sinking deeper into her heart. In that letter, John spoke of his anger, of the love he had once wanted and never fully received, and of the twisted bond they had shared. The letter was heartbreaking, but it was also a sign that there was still a chance for healing, however small. Anna cried as she read his words, realizing that her obsession had led to a fracture that no one could have predicted. But perhaps, in this moment, they could begin to understand each other. The road to healing was long, and it would never be easy. Anna knew that. John knew that. But they both also knew that there was something worth fighting for. However broken their past might have been, the chance for understanding and redemption was still there, however fragile it might be. They couldn't undo what had been done. The scars would remain forever, etched into both their hearts. But as they began to slowly reconnect, through letters and occasional visits, there was a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild the bond that had been lost in the darkness of their past. And though the future remained uncertain, both mother and son knew that the most important thing was that they were still alive, still capable of change, still capable of love.